I never thought I would become the kind of mother who keeps secrets from her own son. For 32 years, I raised Marcus with honesty as our foundation. I taught him that truth was sacred, that lies were poison, and that family loyalty meant everything. But standing in that kitchen, watching my daughter-in-law smirk at me like I was some unwanted guest in my own home, I realized that sometimes the truth needs to wait for the right moment to reveal itself. My name is Evelyn Porter, and I am 63 years old. I spent 40 years working as a registered nurse at Memorial Hospital, starting from the bottom and working my way up to head nurse in the cardiac unit. I raised two children mostly on my own after my husband Richard passed away from a heart attack when Marcus was 12 and his sister Danielle was 9. I worked double shifts, took extra weekend rotations, and saved every penny I could because I had a dream. That dream was to give my children something I never had growing up: stability, security, and a home that would always be theirs. The house on Maple Street was my life's greatest accomplishment. I bought it 30 years ago when it was practically falling apart. The roof leaked, the foundation had cracks, and the previous owners had let the garden turn into a jungle of weeds and overgrown bushes. But I saw potential in those four walls. I saw Sunday dinners and birthday parties. I saw grandchildren running through the backyard and holiday decorations lighting up the windows. I saw legacy. I spent 15 years paying off that mortgage while simultaneously putting both my children through college. Marcus got his degree in business administration, and Danielle became a veterinarian. They both succeeded, and I took pride in knowing that my sacrifice had meant something. When Marcus got engaged to a woman named Brittany 4 years ago, I was genuinely happy for him. She seemed nice enough at first, pretty, confident, well-spoken. She worked in marketing for some tech company downtown and always dressed like she was about to walk into a board meeting. Brittany said to me during their engagement party, "Mrs. Porter, I just want you to know that I think it's so sweet how close Marcus is to you. Some men are such mama's boys, but Marcus has a healthy relationship with his mother, and I respect that." I should have heard the warning in her words. The way she said mama's boy, with that slight curl of her lip. The way healthy relationship sounded more like a diagnosis than a compliment. But I was too happy, too hopeful, too naive to see what was coming. The wedding was beautiful. I cried when Marcus said his vows, and I hugged Brittany and welcomed her into our family with open arms. For the first year, things seemed fine. They lived in an apartment downtown, close to both their jobs, and we saw each other regularly for dinners and weekend visits. But then Brittany got promoted, and suddenly she started talking about their need for more space and a real home to start a family. Marcus called me one evening, his voice heavy with exhaustion. He said, "Mom, we've been looking at houses, but everything in our budget is either too small or in a bad neighborhood. Brittany is really stressed about it. She keeps saying we need to establish ourselves before we have kids, and I don't know what to do." My heart broke for my son. I remembered what it felt like to be young and struggling, wanting to build a life but feeling like the world was designed to keep you down. So I made a decision that, at the time, felt like the most natural thing in the world. I said to him, "Marcus, why don't you and Brittany move into the house on Maple Street? I've been thinking about downsizing anyway. That house is too big for just me, and it would make me happy to know you're building your family there." The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for so long that I thought we had been disconnected. Then Marcus said, his voice cracking, "Mom, are you serious? That's your home. You've lived there for 30 years. I replied, "And now it can be your home. I'll find a nice little apartment closer to the hospital, something manageable for an old woman like me." Marcus laughed. but I could hear the tears in his voice. He said, "You're not old, Mom. You're the strongest person I know." "But are you sure about this? I mean, really sure?" I was sure. At least I thought I was. What I didn't tell Marcus was that I never actually transferred the deed to his name. I had every intention of doing it eventually, but something held me back. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, call it the wisdom that comes from 63 years of learning that people aren't always what they seem. I moved out of the house and into a modest 2-bedroom apartment about 15 minutes away. I told myself I was being practical, that I would transfer the deed once they were settled, once I could see that they were taking good care of the place. The first few months were wonderful. Brittany seemed genuinely grateful, and she even invited me over for dinner several times. She showed me the plan she had for renovating the kitchen and asked my opinion on paint colors for the living room. I felt included, valued, like I had made the right decision. But then something shifted. It started with small things. Phone calls that went unanswered, invitations that became less frequent. When I did visit, Brittany always seemed to have somewhere else to be, leaving Marcus and me to talk alone while she ran errands or met up with friends. I told myself not to read too much into it. Young couples need their space. Daughters-in-law don't have to be best friends with their mothers-in-law. These things take time. Then Brittany got pregnant and everything changed. I was overjoyed when Marcus called to tell me the news. I immediately started planning, thinking about all the ways I could help, all the baby items I could buy, all the advice I could share from my years of nursing experience. I called Brittany the next day to congratulate her personally. I said, "Brittany, I'm so happy for you both. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." I worked in maternal health for a few years early in my career, and I'd love to help however I can. Brittany's response was cool, almost dismissive. She said, "Thanks, Evelyn. We've got it handled. My mother is coming to stay with us for a few weeks after the baby arrives, so we should be fine." Her mother. Of course. I tried not to feel hurt, but the sting was undeniable. I reminded myself that it was natural for a woman to want her own mother during such a vulnerable time. I would have my chance to bond with my grandchild. I just needed to be patient. But patience became increasingly difficult as the months went by. Every time I suggested visiting, there was an excuse. Brittany was tired. Brittany had a doctor's appointment. Brittany's mother was visiting. Marcus always delivered these excuses apologetically, promising that things would calm down after the baby arrived. My granddaughter Lily was born on a Tuesday in March. I didn't find out until 3 days later, when Marcus finally called to tell me the news. 3 days. My first grandchild had been in the world for 3 days before anyone thought to inform me. I tried to keep my voice steady when I answered the phone. I said, "Marcus, congratulations. How is everyone? How is the baby?" Marcus sounded exhausted but happy. He said, "She's perfect, Mom. 8 pounds, 2 ounces. Brittany is recovering well. Her mom has been a huge help." I swallowed the lump in my throat. I asked, "When can I come see her?" "I could come today. I could bring dinner, help around the house." There was a pause, and then Marcus said, "Actually, Mom, Brittany thinks we should wait a couple of weeks. She wants to establish a routine first, and she's a little overwhelmed with visitors." Visitors. That's what I had become, a visitor. I waited 3 weeks before I finally put my foot down. I told Marcus that I was coming to see my granddaughter whether it was convenient or not. He reluctantly agreed, and I drove over to the house on Maple Street with a car full of baby gifts and a heart full of hope that things would somehow be different. When I arrived, Brittany's mother, Linda, answered the door. She was a tall, thin woman with sharp features and an even sharper smile. She looked me up and down like I was a delivery person who had arrived at the wrong address. Linda said, "Oh, Evelyn, Marcus mentioned you might stop by. Brittany is napping and the baby just went down. Maybe you could come back another time." I felt my blood pressure rise, but I kept my composure. I said, "I've driven 45 minutes to see my granddaughter." "I'll be quiet, but I'm not leaving without at least holding her." Something flickered in Linda's eyes, something that looked like amusement mixed with contempt. She stepped aside and let me in, but the message was clear. I was tolerated, not welcomed. The house looked different. Gone were the warm earth tones I had painted the walls over the years. Everything was now gray and white, cold and modern. The furniture I had left behind had been replaced with sleek, uncomfortable-looking pieces that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Even the smell was different. My home used to smell like cinnamon and vanilla from the candles I burned. Now it smelled like some expensive, sterile perfume. Marcus emerged from the back of the house, looking like he hadn't slept in weeks. He hugged me and whispered in my ear, "Thanks for being patient, Mom. I know this has been hard." I hugged him back and whispered, "I just want to see my granddaughter." He led me to the nursery, which had been my sewing room when I lived there. The walls were painted a soft pink, and a beautiful white crib sat in the center of the room. And there, sleeping peacefully with her tiny fists curled up near her face, was the most beautiful baby I had ever seen. Lily had Marcus's nose and chin, and already I could see hints of his dark curly hair beginning to sprout on her perfect little head. I felt tears streaming down my face as I stood there, looking at this miracle, this continuation of my family, this little person who carried my blood and my legacy. I asked Marcus quietly, "Can I hold her?" He nodded and gently lifted Lily from the crib. When he placed her in my arms, something in my chest cracked open. All the frustration and hurt of the past months melted away. In that moment, nothing else mattered except this tiny, perfect human being. I don't know how long I stood there just holding her and crying silently. It could have been minutes or hours, but eventually I heard footsteps behind me, and Brittany's voice cut through the moment like a knife. Brittany said, "What is she doing here?" I said we weren't ready for visitors. I turned to face her, still holding Lily. Brittany was wearing an expensive silk robe, and her hair was perfectly styled despite supposedly having just woken up from a nap. Her eyes were cold, calculating. Marcus stepped between us. He said, "Britt, it's fine. It's just my mom. She wanted to see Lily." Brittany crossed her arms. She said, "Your mom seems to have trouble understanding boundaries, Marcus. We talked about this." I felt my face flush with anger, but I kept my voice calm for the baby's sake. I said, "I apologize if my visit is inconvenient, Brittany, but I've been waiting weeks to meet my granddaughter. I think a grandmother has a right to see her grandchild." Brittany laughed, but there was no humor in it. She said, "A right? This is our home, Evelyn. We decide who visits and when. You don't get to just show up whenever you feel like it." The words hit me like a slap. Our home. As if I hadn't lived within these walls for 3 decades. As if I hadn't raised my children here, mourned my husband here, built my entire life here. But I said nothing. I handed Lily back to Marcus, kissed her forehead one last time, and left without another word. I cried the entire drive back to my apartment, wondering what I had done wrong, wondering how I had become the enemy in my own family. Over the next 2 years, things only got worse. My visits became increasingly rare and increasingly uncomfortable. Brittany controlled everything, from when I could see Lily to what I could give her as gifts. Once, I bought Lily a beautiful handmade doll from a craft fair, and Brittany threw it away because it didn't match the nursery aesthetic. Another time, I offered to babysit so Marcus and Brittany could have a date night, and Brittany laughed and said they would rather hire a professional. I started to notice changes in Marcus, too. He became quieter, more withdrawn. The confident, happy young man I had raised was disappearing, replaced by someone who seemed constantly apologetic and afraid of saying the wrong thing. When I tried to talk to him about it, he always defended Brittany. Marcus would say things like, She's just stressed, Mom. Work is really demanding right now. Or, you don't understand how hard it is for her. Her mother wasn't supportive when she was growing up, so she's overcompensating. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that my son knew what he was doing, that his marriage was healthy, that everything would work out. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon in October, exactly 2 years and 4 months after Marcus and Brittany had moved into the house. I had called ahead this time, asking if I could stop by to bring Lily a birthday present early since I had a medical appointment scheduled for her actual birthday. Marcus said yes, so I drove over with the gift wrapped and my expectations carefully managed. When I arrived, Brittany was in the middle of what she called a reorganization project. There were boxes everywhere, and she was directing Linda around like a general commanding troops. Brittany barely acknowledged my arrival before launching into a criticism. Brittany said, "Oh, Evelyn. Good, you're here. You can help us clear out some of this old junk from the basement. I don't know why you left so much stuff behind when you moved out, but we really need the storage space." I stared at her, stunned. She was talking about the boxes I had carefully packed and stored in the basement before moving out. Boxes containing family photo albums, my husband Richard's belongings, heirlooms that had been passed down through 3 generations. I had left them there because I trusted that they would be safe, because I thought of the basement as still being mine in some way. I said carefully, "Those boxes contain family memories, Brittany. My husband's things, photos of Marcus and Danielle growing up. I'd appreciate it if you didn't throw them away." Brittany rolled her eyes. She said, "Nobody wants your old junk cluttering up our house, Evelyn. If you wanted to keep that stuff, you should have taken it with you when you moved out. This is our home now, and we need the space." Something inside me snapped. I heard myself say, in a voice that sounded calmer than I felt, "Your home? Is that what you think this is?" Brittany smirked. She said, "That's what I know it is. Marcus and I live here. We pay the bills. We maintain the property. Just because you used to live here doesn't mean you get to tell us what to do." I should have stopped there. I should have taken a breath and walked away. But 2 years of swallowed words and suppressed anger came bubbling to the surface, and I couldn't hold it back anymore. I said, "You maintain the property? You pay the bills? With what money exactly? Marcus told me that you've been struggling financially ever since you quit your job to focus on being a mother." "He told me that you've maxed out 3 credit cards and that you're behind on the utility bills." Brittany's face went white, then red with rage. She screamed, "How dare you! Marcus, get in here! Get in here right now!" Marcus came running from the kitchen, his face panicked. He asked, "What's going on? What happened?" Brittany pointed at me like I was a criminal. She said, "Your mother just insulted me in my own home. She accused me of being financially irresponsible. She's completely out of line and I want her to leave. Now." Marcus looked between us, his expression torn. I could see the internal battle playing out across his features. He loved me, I knew he did, but he was afraid of Brittany. I could see it in the way his shoulders hunched, the way his eyes couldn't quite meet mine. Marcus said quietly, "Mom, maybe you should go. We can talk about this later." I shook my head. I said, "No, Marcus, we need to talk about this now, about how your wife has been treating me for years, about how she's isolated me from my own grandchild, about how she's taken over a house that I worked my entire life to pay for." Brittany let out a harsh laugh. She said, "Worked your entire life? Please, you gave us this house. It was a gift. You don't get to hold that over our heads forever." And that's when Marcus said the words that broke my heart into a million pieces. Marcus said, his voice raised louder than I had ever heard it, "Mom, don't argue with my wife in her house. This is Brittany's home and you need to respect that. If you can't accept that things have changed, then maybe you shouldn't come around anymore." The room went silent. Even Brittany seemed surprised by the force of Marcus's outburst. Linda stood in the doorway of the basement, watching with undisguised glee, and I stood there, 63 years old, being thrown out of the home I had built by the son I had raised. In that moment, I had a choice. I could leave with my tail between my legs, accepting the role of unwanted outsider that Brittany had been forcing me into for years. Or I could do something I had never planned to do. Something I had hoped I would never have to do. I walked to my purse, which was sitting on the kitchen counter. I could feel everyone's eyes on me as I unzipped the side pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. My hands were shaking as I unfolded it, but my voice was steady when I spoke. I said, "You want me to leave your wife's house, Marcus? That's interesting. Because according to this document, the house on Maple Street doesn't belong to your wife. It doesn't even belong to you." I held up the paper so they could all see it. It was the deed to the house, the original document showing that Evelyn Marie Porter was the sole owner of the property at 347 Maple Street. I continued, "I never transferred the deed. I let you live here because you're my son and I wanted to help you build a life. But this house has always belonged to me. Every wall, every floor, every blade of grass in that backyard. Mine." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's face went through a series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, something that looked like shame. Brittany's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Linda's smug expression had melted into something closer to panic. Finally, Brittany found her voice. She said, "That's impossible. Marcus said the house was ours. He said you signed it over to us." I looked at my son. I asked quietly, "Did you tell her that, Marcus? Did you lie to your wife about who owns this house?" Marcus couldn't meet my eyes. He said, almost in a whisper, "I thought you were going to transfer it eventually. You said it was our home. I just assumed." I felt tears threatening to fall, but I refused to give Brittany the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I said I wanted you to build your life here. I never said I was giving up ownership. And after the way I've been treated for the past 2 years, I'm certainly not going to sign over anything now." Brittany's shock was quickly transforming into rage. She stepped toward me, her hands balled into fists. She said, "You manipulative old witch. You've been holding this over us the entire time? Making us think we were building equity in a home that isn't even ours?" I stood my ground. I replied, "I've been watching you take over my home, throw away my belongings, and turn my son against me. I've been watching you treat me like an inconvenience instead of family, and I've been waiting to see if things would get better, if maybe you would eventually show some gratitude, some respect. But clearly, that was never going to happen." Marcus stepped between us again, but this time he looked lost, like a child who had just learned that the world was not what he thought it was. He said, "Mom, what are you saying? Are you going to kick us out? Where would we go? Lily's entire life is here." The mention of Lily hit me right in the heart. My granddaughter, my sweet Lily, who barely knew me because her mother had made sure to keep us apart. I thought about her growing up in this house, surrounded by Brittany's coldness and materialism. I thought about the kind of person she might become if I didn't intervene. I said slowly, "I'm not going to make any decisions today. This is a lot for everyone to process. But I want to make something very clear. I am done being pushed aside. I am done being treated like I don't matter. If I'm going to let you continue living in my house, things are going to have to change." Brittany sneered at me. She asked, "What kind of changes?" I looked her directly in the eyes. I said, "For starters, I want regular visits with my granddaughter. Real visits, not 15-minute check-ins with you hovering over us. I want to be included in family events and holidays. I want my belongings in the basement left alone. And I want to be treated with basic human decency when I'm in this house." Brittany laughed again, but this time there was an edge of hysteria to it. She said, "You think you can just waltz in here and make demands?" Marcus, tell her. Tell her she can't do this. But Marcus was staring at the deed in my hands, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and defeated. He said, "She can do whatever she wants, Brittany. It's her house." The admission seemed to knock the wind out of Brittany. She looked at her husband like she was seeing him for the first time, and she didn't like what she saw. She said, "I can't believe this. I gave up my career for this family. I had your child. And now you're telling me that we've been living in your mother's house this whole time? That everything we have belongs to her?" Marcus ran his hands through his hair. He said, "I didn't know, okay?" "I thought she was going to transfer the deed. I thought it was just a formality." I interrupted. "It might have been a formality if your wife had shown me an ounce of kindness over the past 2 years. But she didn't. She made it very clear that I wasn't wanted here, that I wasn't part of this family. So I kept the deed as insurance. And now I'm glad I did." Linda finally spoke up from the doorway. She said, "Brittany, honey, maybe we should all calm down and talk about this rationally." Brittany whirled on her mother. She snapped, "Stay out of this, Mom. This is between me and this woman." I raised an eyebrow. I said, "This woman? I have a name, Brittany, and I'm your mother-in-law whether you like it or not. I'm also the woman who raised the man you married, who gave you a place to live when you couldn't afford one, who has tried again and again to be part of your life only to be shut out at every turn." Something shifted in Brittany's expression. For just a moment, I saw a flicker of something that might have been shame or vulnerability. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by her usual mask of superiority. Brittany said coldly, "I think you should leave now. We all need time to think about what happens next." I nodded. I said, "I agree. But before I go, I want to see Lily. I want to say goodbye to my granddaughter." Brittany opened her mouth to protest, but Marcus held up his hand. He said firmly, "Let her see Lily, Britt. She's her grandmother." It was the first time I had seen Marcus stand up to Brittany, and despite everything, it gave me a small spark of hope. Maybe my son wasn't completely lost. Maybe there was still a chance to reach him. I walked to the nursery, which had been transformed into a little girl's bedroom since my last visit. The walls were now lavender, and toys and books filled every corner. Lily was sitting on the floor, playing with a set of wooden blocks, completely oblivious to the drama that had unfolded in the living room. When she saw me, her face lit up with recognition. She said excitedly, "Grandma Evie!" I knelt down and opened my arms, and she ran into them without hesitation. I held her close, breathing in the sweet scent of her shampoo, feeling her little heart beating against my chest. In that moment, I made a silent promise to myself and to her. I was going to fight for this child. I was going to make sure she knew that her grandmother loved her more than anything in the world. I said softly, "I love you, Lily. Grandma loves you so much." Don't ever forget that, okay? Lily pulled back and looked at me with her big brown eyes, so much like her father's. She said, "I love you too, Grandma. When are you coming back?" I smiled through my tears. I said, "Soon, sweetheart, I promise. Grandma is going to be around a lot more from now on." I kissed her forehead and stood up, knowing that I had to leave before I broke down completely. As I walked back through the living room, I could feel Brittany's glare burning into my back. Marcus walked me to the door, his expression still shell-shocked. At the threshold, I turned to face him. I said quietly, "Marcus, I love you. I've always loved you, and nothing is ever going to change that. But I need you to understand something. I didn't raise you to be pushed around. I didn't raise you to let anyone, not even your wife, treat your mother like she doesn't matter. Somewhere along the way, you forgot who you are. I'm hoping that today was a wake-up call." Marcus's eyes glistened with unshed tears. He whispered, "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know it had gotten this bad." I've been so busy trying to keep the peace that I didn't see what was happening. I reached up and touched his cheek, the same gesture I had used to comfort him since he was a little boy. I said, "I know, honey, but keeping the peace shouldn't mean sacrificing your self-respect or your family relationships. Think about that." I walked to my car without looking back. As I drove away, I could see Marcus still standing in the doorway watching me go. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if my relationship with my son could be salvaged, or if Brittany would find some way to turn the situation to her advantage. But I did know one thing. I was done being invisible. The drive back to my apartment felt longer than usual. My mind was racing with everything that had happened, everything that had been said. I kept replaying Marcus's words in my head. "Don't argue with my wife in her house." The pain of hearing my own son say those words was still fresh, still raw. But there was something else too. Something that felt almost like liberation. For 2 years, I had been walking on eggshells, accepting crumbs of attention from my son and granddaughter, tolerating Brittany's disrespect because I was afraid of losing them completely. But fear is a terrible master. It makes you small. It makes you accept things you should never accept. And today, I had finally stopped being afraid. When I got home, I called my daughter Danielle. She lived 3 states away with her husband and their 2 kids, and we talked on the phone at least twice a week. Unlike Marcus, Danielle had always maintained a close relationship with me, calling regularly and visiting whenever she could. Danielle answered on the second ring. She said, "Hey, Mom, how was the visit?" I took a deep breath. I said, "Danny, something happened today. Something big. I need to talk to you about it." For the next hour, I told her everything. The confrontation with Brittany, Marcus's outburst, the revelation about the deed. Danielle listened without interrupting, though I could hear her occasional sharp intakes of breath. When I finished, Danielle said, "Mom, I am so proud of you. I've been wanting to tell you for years that Brittany was trouble, but you always defended her. You always gave her the benefit of the doubt." I sighed. I admitted, "I know. I wanted so badly for it to work out. I wanted Marcus to be happy. But you're right. I ignored the warning signs because I didn't want to see them." Danielle's voice turned fierce. She said, "Well, you see them now. And you have leverage. Use it, Mom. Don't let that woman push you around anymore." I smiled despite everything. My daughter had always been the fighter in the family, the one who stood up for herself and everyone she loved. I said, "I don't want to use the house as a weapon, Danny. That's not who I am." Danielle replied, "I'm not saying you should kick them out on the street. But you have a right to be treated with respect. If Brittany can't manage that, then maybe she needs to understand that actions have consequences." We talked for a while longer, strategizing about what my next steps should be. Danielle offered to fly out and be there for moral support, but I told her it wasn't necessary. This was something I needed to handle on my own. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and thought about the house on Maple Street. I had built so many memories within those walls. Richard proposing to me in the backyard, bringing Marcus home from the hospital as a newborn, teaching Danielle to ride a bike on the sidewalk out front. Christmas mornings and summer barbecues and quiet evenings reading in the living room while the kids did their homework at the kitchen table. Those memories belonged to me. They couldn't be painted over or thrown away, and neither could I. The next few weeks were tense and strange. Marcus called a few days after the confrontation, his voice cautious and apologetic. He said, "Mom, can we talk? I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realize I haven't been fair to you." We met for coffee at a neutral location, a little cafe downtown that had been one of our favorite spots when he was in college. When I saw him walk in, I was struck by how tired he looked. There were dark circles under his eyes. and his usual confident posture had been replaced by something more hesitant, more uncertain. We exchanged awkward greetings and ordered our drinks. For a few minutes, neither of us seemed to know what to say. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. He said, "Mom, I need to apologize. What I said to you that day, about arguing with Brittany in her house, it was wrong. I don't even know where those words came from. It was like someone else was speaking through me." I stirred my coffee slowly. I replied, "But you did say them, Marcus. And they revealed something about how you've been seeing things, how you've been seeing me." Marcus nodded, his jaw tight. He said, "I know, and I've been thinking about why. Brittany has always been intense. She has very strong opinions about how things should be, and I guess over time, I started to adopt those opinions as my own. It was easier than fighting." I leaned forward. I asked, "And what about the things she's done? The way she's excluded me, controlled my access to Lily, thrown away my belongings? Did you adopt those behaviors too, or did you just look the other way?" Marcus flinched like I had struck him. He said quietly, "Both, I guess. I'm not proud of it, Mom. I'm really not. But I didn't know what else to do. Every time I tried to stand up for you, Brittany would get so upset. She would accuse me of choosing you over her, of not being a good husband, and eventually, it just became easier to—" He trailed off, but I finished his sentence for him. I said, "To abandon your mother, to pretend like I didn't matter." Tears started to roll down Marcus's cheeks. He said, "I never stopped caring about you, Mom. I never stopped loving you. I just got lost. I got so lost, and I didn't know how to find my way back." I reached across the table and took his hand. I said, "I believe you, Marcus. But things have to change. I can't keep being pushed aside. I won't do it anymore." Marcus squeezed my hand. He said, "I know, and I want things to change too. But it's complicated. Brittany is furious about the deed. She feels betrayed, like we've been living a lie." I raised an eyebrow. I asked, "And do you feel that way too?" Marcus hesitated. Then he said, "I feel confused. I thought you were going to give us the house eventually. That's what you said, that you wanted us to build our lives there. I didn't realize that came with conditions." I pulled my hand back. I said firmly, "Everything comes with conditions, Marcus. When you borrow someone's car, you're expected to return it in the same condition. When someone gives you a job, you're expected to do the work. When someone opens their home to you, you're expected to treat that home and that person with respect. Those aren't unreasonable conditions." Marcus looked down at the table. He admitted, "No, they're not. I see that now." We talked for another hour, covering everything from his relationship with Brittany to his hopes for Lily's future. By the end of our conversation, I felt like I was finally talking to my son again, the real Marcus, not the hollow shell that Brittany had turned him into. As we were leaving, Marcus asked, "What happens now, Mom? With the house, I mean?" I thought about it for a moment. Then I said, "That depends on what happens next with our family. I'm not going to make any rash decisions, but I need to see real change, Marcus. Not just promises. Actions." Marcus nodded solemnly. He said, "I understand, and I'm going to try. I'm going to talk to Brittany, make her understand that things have to be different." I hugged him goodbye, holding on a little longer than usual. As I watched him walk to his car, I felt a mix of hope and apprehension. Change is never easy, especially when it involves challenging established patterns and power dynamics. I didn't know if Marcus would be able to stand up to Brittany. I didn't know if Brittany was even capable of the kind of transformation that would be necessary, but I knew that I had to give them the chance. For Marcus, for Lily, and for myself. The weeks that followed were filled with small but significant changes. Brittany didn't become a different person overnight, but there were signs that Marcus's conversation with her had had some impact. I was invited to family dinners again, and while Brittany remained cool toward me, she was at least civil. I was allowed to take Lily to the park without supervision, to have her spend occasional weekends at my apartment. These might seem like small victories, but after 2 years of being frozen out, they felt enormous. One afternoon, about 2 months after the confrontation, I was at the house helping Marcus install some new shelves in the garage. Brittany was inside with Lily, and for once, the atmosphere wasn't charged with tension. As we worked, Marcus started talking about his marriage in a way he never had before. Marcus said, "You know, Mom, I've been going to therapy. Just started a few weeks ago." Brittany doesn't know about it. I set down my screwdriver. I asked, "What made you decide to do that?" Marcus stared at the wall, his expression distant. He replied, "That day when you showed us the deed, the look on your face when I told you not to argue with Brittany. I've never seen you look so hurt, Mom. And I realized that I had become someone I didn't recognize. Someone I didn't like." I felt my throat tighten. I said gently, "I'm proud of you for seeking help, Marcus. That takes courage." He shrugged, but I could see that my words meant something to him. He continued, "The therapist has been helping me understand some things about how I ended up in this situation, why I let Brittany take over so completely. A lot of it goes back to when Dad died." I was surprised by this turn in the conversation. I asked carefully, "What do you mean?" Marcus finally looked at me, his eyes filled with old pain that I thought had healed long ago. He said, "When Dad died, I was 12, old enough to understand what was happening, but not old enough to process it properly. And you were working so hard, Mom. You were doing everything you could to keep us afloat, and I didn't want to be a burden. So I learned to keep my feelings inside, to not rock the boat, to just go along with whatever would make things easier for everyone else." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I whispered, "Oh, Marcus, I didn't know. I thought you were doing okay. You seemed so strong." Marcus shook his head. He said, "I wasn't strong. I was just good at pretending. And then I met Brittany, who is very strong-willed and very certain about everything, and I guess I fell into the same pattern, keeping the peace, not making waves, letting her take charge so I didn't have to feel anything." I moved closer to him and put my hand on his shoulder. I said, "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm sorry I wasn't more aware of what you were going through. I was so focused on providing for you and Danielle that I didn't always stop to check in emotionally." Marcus covered my hand with his own. He said, "It's not your fault, Mom. You did the best you could. Better than the best, really. I've never doubted for a second that you love me. I just have some stuff I need to work through, and I'm finally starting to do that." We hugged in the middle of the garage, surrounded by tools and sawdust, and I felt something shift between us. A healing that had begun the day I pulled out that deed was finally taking root. We still had a long way to go, but for the first time in years, I felt like we were on the same team. Not all changes were positive, though. As Marcus started to come out of his shell and assert himself more, Brittany's behavior became increasingly erratic. She oscillated between cold silence and explosive anger, often triggered by the smallest things. One evening, I arrived for dinner to find Marcus and Brittany in the middle of a screaming match while Lily hid in her room. I could hear Brittany yelling from outside the front door. She shouted, "You're taking her side! You're always taking her side now! Ever since she waved that deed in our faces, you've been treating me like the enemy." Marcus's voice was strained but firm. He responded, "I'm not taking sides, Brittany. I'm trying to fix things. Our family was broken, and I was part of the problem. I'm trying to be better." Brittany laughed bitterly. She said, "Better for who? For your mother? Because it certainly hasn't been better for me. I feel like I'm living with a stranger." I debated whether to knock or leave. Before I could decide, the door swung open and Brittany stood there, her face flushed with rage. Brittany said sarcastically, "Oh, perfect. Mother Evelyn is here. Just what we needed." I kept my voice calm, I said, I heard shouting. Is everything all right? Brittany stepped aside to let me in, her body language aggressive. She said, Everything is just wonderful, Evelyn. Your son has decided to become a completely different person, and apparently I'm supposed to just accept that. I looked past her to Marcus, who was standing in the living room looking exhausted. I asked him, Marcus, what's going on? Before he could answer, Brittany jumped in. She said, What's going on is that my husband has been going behind my back to see a therapist. A therapist. Like there's something wrong with him. Like there's something wrong with us. I felt a flash of anger on Marcus's behalf. I said evenly, There's nothing wrong with seeking help, Brittany. It takes strength to acknowledge that you're struggling and to do something about it. Brittany's eyes narrowed. She said, Of course you defend him. This is all your fault, you know. Everything was fine before you pulled that stunt with the deed. Marcus and I were happy. We had a good life. I couldn't hold back anymore. I said, Were you happy, Brittany? Or were you comfortable? There's a difference. You were comfortable having complete control over my son, over this house, over my relationship with my granddaughter. But that's not the same as happiness. Brittany took a step toward me, her hands clenched. She demanded, Who do you think you are? You don't know anything about my marriage. Marcus stepped between us, his voice shaking but resolute. He said, Enough, both of you. Brittany, Mom is right. We weren't happy. I wasn't happy. I've been miserable for years, and I was too afraid to admit it. That's not your fault, but it's not something we can keep ignoring. Brittany looked at him like he had slapped her. She said, her voice cracking, So what are you saying? That you don't love me anymore? Marcus's expression softened. He said, I'm saying that I love you, but I also lost myself. And I need to find out who I am again before I can be a good husband to you or a good father to Lily. I'm not leaving, Brittany. I'm asking you to work with me, to go to counseling together, to try to build something healthier than what we have now. The room fell silent. Brittany's lower lip trembled, and for a moment she looked almost vulnerable. Then her walls went back up, and she said coldly, I need to think about this. She walked out of the room and up the stairs. A moment later, we heard the bedroom door slam. Marcus sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. He said, I don't know if she'll ever agree to counseling. She thinks therapy is for weak people. I sat down next to him. I said, You can't force her, Marcus, but you can decide what kind of life you want to live and what kind of example you want to set for Lily. Whatever happens with Brittany, you're already becoming a better version of yourself. That matters. Marcus looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. He asked, Do you think we can save our marriage, Mom? Honestly? I thought about it before answering. I said, I think that depends on both of you. Marriage requires two people who are willing to grow and change together. If Brittany is willing to do the work, then yes, I think there's hope. But if she's not... I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't have to. The next few months were a roller coaster. Brittany eventually agreed to couples counseling, though she approached it with skepticism and defensiveness. Progress was slow and uneven. There were good days when they seemed to connect on a deeper level, and bad days when old patterns reasserted themselves. Through it all, I tried to maintain a supportive presence without overstepping. One unexpected development was that Linda, Brittany's mother, started to change too. It turned out that much of Brittany's behavior had been learned from Linda, who had her own issues with control and perfectionism. When Linda saw how close her daughter's marriage came to falling apart, she apparently did some soul-searching of her own. She called me one afternoon, and the conversation was surprisingly honest. Linda said, "Evelyn, I owe you an apology. I was rude to you that first day you came to see Lily, and many times after that. I thought I was protecting my daughter, but really, I was just reinforcing her worst instincts. I was speechless for a moment. Then I said, "Thank you, Linda. That means a lot." Linda continued, "Brittany wasn't always like this, you know. When she was young, she was sweet and open and loving. But her father and I had a difficult marriage, and I think she learned that controlling her environment was the only way to feel safe. I should have gotten her help years ago. Instead, I just modeled the same behavior." It was strange to feel sympathy for Brittany after everything she had put me through. But hearing Linda's words, I started to understand that hurt people often hurt others. It doesn't excuse the behavior, but it helps explain it. I said to Linda, "We all carry wounds from our past. What matters is what we do with them. If Brittany can learn to let down her walls and trust the people who love her, she might find the happiness she's been chasing." Linda sighed. She replied, "I hope so." For her sake, and for Lily's. That conversation marked a turning point in my relationship with Linda. We weren't best friends, but we developed a mutual respect that made family gatherings much less awkward. As for Lily, she blossomed during this period. With the tension in the house decreasing and her father becoming more present and engaged, she became more confident and joyful. She started calling me regularly, chattering about school and friends and her favorite cartoons. We developed rituals: Saturday morning pancake breakfasts, trips to the zoo, baking cookies together at my apartment. I was finally getting to be the grandmother I had always wanted to be. 1 year after the confrontation over the deed, I received an unexpected invitation. Brittany asked if she could take me to lunch, just the two of us. I was wary but curious, so I agreed. We met at a nice restaurant downtown. Brittany looked different than I remembered, softer somehow, with less makeup and a more relaxed posture. She ordered a glass of wine and took a long sip before speaking. Brittany said, "Evelyn, I asked you here because I want to apologize, properly. Not because Marcus made me, not because I'm trying to manipulate you. I genuinely want to say I'm sorry." I waited, giving her space to continue. Brittany went on, "I was threatened by you from the very beginning. You're such a strong woman, so capable and independent. You raised 2 successful children on your own, built a career, owned a home. And here I was, feeling like I could never measure up, like Marcus would always love you more than he could ever love me." I was surprised by her honesty. I said, "Brittany, it was never a competition. A man can love his mother and his wife. Those are different kinds of love." Brittany nodded, her eyes glistening. She admitted, "I know that now, but I didn't then. I was so insecure, and I dealt with it by trying to push you away, by making sure I was the only woman in Marcus's life. I told myself I was protecting my family, but really, I was just protecting my own ego." She paused to collect herself. Then she continued, "The way I treated you was wrong. Keeping you from Lily, throwing away your belongings, making you feel unwelcome in your own home. There's no excuse for any of it. I can only tell you that I'm working on myself, in therapy, in our marriage, in how I relate to other people, and I hope that someday you might be able to forgive me." I sat with her words for a moment, feeling their weight. Finally, I said, "Forgiveness isn't something that happens all at once, Brittany. It's a process. But I appreciate your apology, and I'm willing to try to rebuild our relationship, for Marcus, for Lily, and for both of us." Brittany reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She said, "Thank you, Evelyn. That's more than I deserve." We finished our lunch with conversation that felt genuine for the first time. I learned about Brittany's childhood, her struggles with anxiety, her fears about being a good mother. She was still prickly at times, still guarded, but there was an openness there that hadn't existed before. It gave me hope. 3 months later, on a sunny Sunday afternoon, my whole family gathered at the house on Maple Street for a barbecue. Marcus was grilling burgers in the backyard while Danielle and her husband played with their kids and Lily in the grass. Brittany and Linda were setting the table on the patio, and I was in the kitchen putting together a salad. As I looked out the window at the scene before me, I felt a profound sense of peace. This was what I had always wanted: family, connection, love. The path to get here had been painful and winding, but somehow we had arrived. Marcus came inside to grab more burger buns and found me standing at the window, lost in thought. He asked, "You okay, Mom?" I smiled at him. I said, "I'm more than okay. I'm happy." He put his arm around my shoulders and looked out at the backyard with me. He said, "Me too, Mom. Me too." We stood there together for a moment, mother and son, watching our family enjoy a beautiful day. Then Marcus asked, "So, I've been meaning to talk to you about something." I turned to look at him. I asked, "What is it?" Marcus took a deep breath. He said, "Brittany and I have been talking, and we want to buy the house from you. Officially. At fair market value. We want it to truly be ours, but we also want to do it the right way this time." I felt my heart swell with emotion. I said, "You don't have to buy it, Marcus. I told you when you moved in that I wanted you to build your life here." Marcus shook his head. He said, "I know, Mom, but we want to. We want to earn it. And honestly, the money could help you. You could travel or upgrade your apartment or just have a nice nest egg for retirement. You've spent your whole life giving to other people. Let us give something back." I thought about it. The house on Maple Street was more than a property to me. It was memories, history, identity. But maybe it was time to let go of that attachment. Maybe it was time to trust my son with the legacy I had built. I said slowly, "I'll think about it, Marcus. It's a big decision." Marcus nodded. He replied, "No pressure. Whenever you're ready." He kissed my cheek and headed back outside with the buns. I watched him go, this man who had once been a little boy crying in my arms, who had grown and stumbled and lost his way and found it again. I was proud of him. So proud. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat on the porch swing of the house on Maple Street one last time. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I could hear crickets starting their nightly symphony, and the smell of lingering charcoal from the grill hung in the air. I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. The confrontation, the revelation of the deed, the difficult conversations, and gradual healing. I thought about Marcus's growth and Brittany's transformation and Lily's joy. I thought about what it means to be a mother, a grandmother, a keeper of family history. And I made my decision. I would sell the house to Marcus and Brittany. I would let go of the physical structure and trust that the memories and love it represented would live on in my children and grandchildren. I would take the money and finally take that trip to Italy I had always dreamed of. I would buy myself a cozy little condo closer to Danielle and her family. I would stop holding on so tightly and start living for myself. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. As I sat there on the porch swing, watching the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky, I realized something important. The deed to the house had been my insurance policy, my safety net, my way of maintaining control. But true security doesn't come from documents or properties. It comes from the relationships we build, the love we give and receive, the trust we place in one another. I had spent so long protecting myself from loss that I had almost lost everything that mattered. It took my son yelling at me, telling me not to argue with his wife in her house, to wake me up. It took pulling out that deed and asserting my ownership to reclaim my place in my own family. But in the end, it wasn't the deed that saved us. It was the conversations that followed, the apologies, the therapy, the slow and painful work of rebuilding trust. My name is Evelyn Porter. I am 64 years old, and I am finally free. Free from the fear of being forgotten. Free from the need to control. Free from the belief that I had to sacrifice myself to earn my family's love. They love me for who I am, not for what I can give them. And that is the greatest gift I have ever received. 2 months later, I signed the papers transferring ownership of the house on Maple Street to Marcus and Brittany. We had a little ceremony in the living room with champagne and tears and hugs all around. Lily made me a card that said, "Thank you, Grandma Evie, for our house," with a crooked drawing of the property surrounded by flowers. I framed that card and hung it in my new condo, which has a beautiful view of a park where children play every afternoon. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on my balcony drinking my morning coffee, I can hear their laughter drifting up to me, and I think about all the laughter that has filled the house on Maple Street over the years. The house doesn't belong to me anymore, but the love and memories it represents will always be mine, and that, in the end, is more than enough. But I would be lying if I said the journey was easy, or that there weren't moments when I questioned everything. There were nights when I lay awake in my apartment, staring at the ceiling and wondering if I had done the right thing by confronting Brittany. There were days when the silence from Marcus felt like a physical weight on my chest, and I had to remind myself that healing takes time, that change doesn't happen overnight. I remember one particular evening, about 3 months after the confrontation, when I almost gave up. Marcus had canceled our coffee date at the last minute, citing a work emergency that I suspected was actually Brittany related. I sat alone in my kitchen, eating a microwave dinner and feeling more isolated than I had ever felt in my life. I picked up the phone and called Danielle, my voice cracking as I spoke. I said, "Danny, I don't know if I can do this anymore." Maybe I should have just kept my mouth shut. Maybe things were better when I was invisible. Danielle's response was immediate and fierce. She said, "Don't you dare, Mom. Don't you dare go back to that. You spent 2 years being treated like garbage, and you finally stood up for yourself. That took courage. Real courage." And I'm not going to let you throw that away because Marcus missed one coffee date. I wiped my eyes. I said, "But what if I've made everything worse? What if Brittany convinces Marcus to cut me off completely?" Danielle was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Then that would be Marcus's choice and it would break your heart. But at least you would know the truth about where you stand. At least you wouldn't be living a lie, pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't." "That's not living, Mom. That's just existing." Her words hit me like a splash of cold water. She was right. I had spent 2 years existing, going through the motions of life while my heart was slowly breaking. The confrontation with Brittany had been painful, but it had also been honest. For the first time in years, everyone knew exactly where they stood. I said to Danielle, "When did you get so wise, Danny?" She laughed. She replied, "I learned from the best. Now stop feeling sorry for yourself and go take a bath or something. Self-care isn't just a buzzword, you know." I followed her advice. I drew a hot bath, poured a glass of wine, and let myself cry. Really cry. All the tears I had been holding back for months came pouring out, and when I finally got out of the tub, I felt lighter somehow. Cleaner. Like I had washed away not just the dirt of the day, but some of the grief and fear that had been weighing me down. That night marked a turning point for me. I stopped waiting for Marcus to call and started building a life outside of my relationship with him. I signed up for a pottery class at the community center, something I had always wanted to try but never made time for. I reconnected with old friends from the hospital, women I had lost touch with during the years when all my energy went toward working and raising my children. I even started going to a support group for women navigating difficult family relationships. The support group was particularly helpful. I met women from all walks of life, each dealing with their own version of family dysfunction. Listening to their stories helped put my own situation in perspective. Yes, things with Brittany were difficult. Yes, Marcus had hurt me deeply with his words. But we were still talking. We were still trying. That was more than many of these women had. One evening, after a particularly emotional session, a woman named Helen approached me. She was a petite woman in her 70s with kind eyes and silver hair. Helen said, "Evelyn, can I give you some advice?" I nodded. I said, "Of course." Helen took my hand in hers. She said, "When my children stopped speaking to me, I spent years being angry. Angry at them, angry at my new husband, angry at myself for choices I had made. But the anger didn't bring them back. It just made me bitter and lonely." I asked, "What changed?" Helen smiled sadly. She replied, "I realized that I couldn't control other people. I could only control myself. So I focused on being the best version of me I could be. I traveled, I volunteered, I made new friends. I built a life that didn't depend on my children for meaning or happiness. And you know what happened?" I leaned in, curious. I asked, "What?" Helen's smile widened. She said, "My daughter reached out to me 3 years later. She saw the pictures I was posting on social media, saw how happy and fulfilled I looked, and she realized that she missed me. We still have a complicated relationship, but we're working on it. And I truly believe that it was because I stopped chasing her and started living my own life." Her words stayed with me for days afterward. I had been so focused on fixing things with Marcus and Brittany that I had neglected myself. I had made their relationship, their opinion of me, the center of my universe. And while family is important, so is having your own identity, your own passions, your own reasons for getting out of bed in the morning. I threw myself into my pottery class with enthusiasm. To my surprise, I discovered that I had a real talent for it. My instructor, a quirky woman named Gloria with paint-stained overalls and wild curly hair, pulled me aside after class one day. Gloria said, "Evelyn, you have a gift. The way you shape the clay, the instinct you have for form and balance, it's really quite remarkable. Have you ever thought about selling your work?" I laughed, genuinely amused by the idea. I said, "Selling my work? Gloria, I just started 3 months ago. I'm still a beginner." Gloria shook her head. She replied, "Technique can be taught. What you have is something else. An artistic eye, a sensitivity to the material. Trust me, I've been doing this for 40 years. I know talent when I see it." Her encouragement planted a seed that would eventually grow into something I never expected. I started creating more pieces, experimenting with different styles and glazes. I set up a small workspace in my apartment, filling it with pottery wheels and kilns and bags of clay. And slowly, tentatively, I began to think of myself as an artist. It was around this time that Marcus and I had our conversation in the garage, the one where he told me about going to therapy and working through his grief over his father's death. That conversation marked the beginning of our real reconciliation. But what I didn't tell him that day was that I was also in therapy, working through my own issues around loss, control, and self-worth. My therapist, Dr. Ramirez, helped me understand patterns in my behavior that I had never recognized before. She pointed out that after Richard died, I had channeled all my grief into providing for my children. I hadn't allowed myself to mourn, to fall apart, to be vulnerable. Instead, I had become a machine, working and saving and sacrificing with single-minded determination. Dr. Ramirez said during one of our sessions, "Evelyn, you've spent your entire adult life taking care of other people. First your husband, then your children, then your patients. When was the last time you let someone take care of you?" I thought about it for a long moment. Then I said, "I don't know if I ever have. It doesn't feel natural to me." Dr. Ramirez nodded thoughtfully. She replied, "That's not uncommon for women of your generation. You were taught that your value comes from what you do for others. But here's the thing, Evelyn. You can't pour from an empty cup. If you want to have healthy relationships with your son and granddaughter, you need to make sure your own needs are being met too. Her words challenged everything I thought I knew about being a good mother, a good grandmother, a good person. I had always believed that selflessness was a virtue, that putting others first was the highest calling. But Dr. Ramirez helped me see that there's a difference between healthy generosity and self-abandonment. I started setting boundaries, something I had never been good at. When Marcus asked me to babysit at the last minute, I learned to say no if it conflicted with my pottery class or my plans with friends. When Brittany made subtle digs about my age or my appearance, I learned to call it out instead of swallowing my hurt. When Lily threw tantrums during our visits, I learned to stay calm and consistent instead of giving in to keep the peace. These changes didn't come easily. There were setbacks and arguments and moments when I wanted to go back to my old ways. But slowly, I began to feel like myself again. Not the invisible grandmother who existed only to serve others, but Evelyn Porter, nurse, mother, artist, friend, and woman of substance. The day I sold my first pottery piece was one of the proudest moments of my life. Gloria had convinced me to put a few items in a local art show, and a woman I had never met paid $200 for a vase I had made with my own two hands. It wasn't about the money. It was about the validation that I had something to offer the world beyond caregiving. I called Danielle that night, practically buzzing with excitement. I said, "Danny, you're not going to believe this. Someone bought my pottery. A complete stranger looked at something I created and thought it was worth paying money for." Danielle screamed so loud that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She said, "Mom, that's amazing. I knew you could do it. Send me pictures right now. I want to see everything." Her enthusiasm was contagious. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt genuinely proud of myself. Not because of what I had done for someone else, but because of what I had accomplished on my own. When Marcus found out about my pottery success, he surprised me by asking if he could come see my workspace. He showed up one Saturday afternoon with Lily in tow, and the three of us spent hours in my little studio, making clay figures and getting absolutely filthy. Lily was in heaven. She loved squishing the clay between her fingers and trying to shape it into animals and flowers. She said, "Grandma Evie, can I come here every weekend? This is the best place ever." Marcus watched us with a soft expression on his face. He said, "Mom, I had no idea you were doing all this. Why didn't you tell me?" I shrugged, focusing on the piece I was shaping. I replied, "You've had a lot going on. I didn't want to bother you with my little hobbies." Marcus shook his head. He said, "This isn't a little hobby. This is art. And it's important because it's yours. I want to know about the things that matter to you, Mom. Not just when you need help with something, but all the time. That's what family means." His words brought tears to my eyes. I had spent so long feeling like I didn't matter, like my only value was in what I could do for others. But here was my son, genuinely interested in my life, my passions, my dreams. It felt like a gift I didn't know I was waiting for. After that day, our relationship shifted in subtle but meaningful ways. Marcus started calling me just to chat, not because he needed something. He would tell me about his day at work, about funny things Lily had said, about articles he had read that he thought I might find interesting, and I would tell him about my pottery, my friends from the support group, the trip to Italy I was planning. Yes, Italy. It had been a dream of mine for decades, ever since I was a young nurse flipping through travel magazines during my lunch breaks. I had always wanted to see the art, taste the food, walk the ancient streets of Rome and Florence and Venice. But there was always a reason to postpone. Not enough money, not enough time. The kids needed me. Richard was sick. Now, with my portion of the house sale and no one depending on me, there was nothing stopping me. I booked a 3-week trip for the following spring and spent months planning every detail. I would visit museums and churches and vineyards. I would take a cooking class in Tuscany and a glass-blowing workshop in Murano. I would eat gelato every single day and not feel guilty about it. When I told Marcus about the trip, his reaction surprised me. I expected him to worry, to question whether it was safe for a woman my age to travel alone. Instead, he hugged me and said, "Mom, that sounds incredible. You deserve this. You've been putting everyone else first for so long. It's time for you to do something just for you." Brittany, to her credit, was equally supportive. She even offered to help me shop for travel clothes, and we spent an afternoon together at the mall, trying on linen pants and comfortable walking shoes. It was the first time we had done anything just the two of us that wasn't tense or awkward. During that shopping trip, Brittany opened up to me in a way she never had before. She told me about her father's absence during her childhood, his addiction and eventual death, and how it had shaped her desperate need for control and security. Brittany said, "I spent my whole life trying to build something that couldn't be taken away from me. A career, a home, a perfect family. I thought if I could just control everything, I would finally feel safe." But it doesn't work like that, does it? I shook my head. I replied, "No, it doesn't. Safety doesn't come from control. It comes from connection, from trusting the people who love you." Brittany was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm starting to understand that now. It's scary letting go of control, but I'm trying." I reached out and squeezed her hand. I said, "That's all any of us can do. Try, and be patient with ourselves when we fail." It was, perhaps, the first truly honest conversation I had ever had with my daughter-in-law, and it gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, we could build a real relationship. Not as adversaries fighting over Marcus's loyalty, but as two women trying to navigate the complicated terrain of family. My trip to Italy was everything I had hoped for and more. I cried standing in front of Michelangelo's David. I ate pasta that changed my understanding of what food could be. I made friends with fellow travelers from around the world and stayed up late drinking wine and sharing stories. I walked until my feet ached and then walked some more, because every corner revealed something beautiful, something ancient, something that filled my soul with wonder. I sent pictures to Marcus and Lily every day, and they would video call me to hear about my adventures. Lily was particularly fascinated by the gelato. She would ask, "Grandma Evie, what flavor did you try today?" "Did you try the pink one?" "I want to try the pink one someday." I promised her that when she was older, I would take her to Italy myself. I would show her the art and the architecture, teach her about history and beauty, and the importance of seeing the world. It was a promise I fully intended to keep. When I returned home, tanned and full of stories, I felt like a different person. Or maybe I felt like myself for the first time in decades. Either way, something had fundamentally shifted. I had proved to myself that I could do things alone, that my life had value beyond my relationships with other people. That didn't mean those relationships weren't important. They were. My bond with Marcus had never been stronger. And Lily. Lily was the light of my life, the reason I got up in the morning. But I no longer needed them to feel whole. I was whole on my own. And that, I finally understood, was the real victory. Not keeping the house, not winning the argument, not proving that I was right and Brittany was wrong. The real victory was finding myself again after years of being lost. It was learning to take up space in the world without apologizing. It was discovering that 64 years old isn't too late to start a new chapter. The house on Maple Street belongs to Marcus and Brittany now. They've made it their own, and I'm glad. But the lessons I learned in that house, about family and loyalty, and the importance of standing up for yourself, those belong to me forever. My name is Evelyn Porter. I am a mother, a grandmother, an artist, and a woman who finally learned her own worth. And that is everything.